particularly gruesome amount of violence referred to as a rage killing.
Y'all want to kill him? Come get me. I'm the one who did it.
Let's go ahead to the 25th of June. That's the day we got involved.
I knew I was down there to murder him, man. I come there for a reason to kill him. You know, and I told him, I'm sending you to hell, boy.
It was very shocking. Describing himself as being the murderer and the sole person responsible just didn't make sense. It just didn't sound reasonable. There are two basic motives: plain old-fashioned greed, love gone wrong. Put those two things together, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
I love this lady on my heart, because she has buffaloed me.
Nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, Huntington, West Virginia is a quiet community with deep roots.
This town sits right on the Ohio River, so it's a pretty location.
It's mostly middle-class, working-class people. It's a close, tight-knit community.
On the afternoon of June 25th, 1998, local resident Denny Aldridge receives a concerning phone call from his brother Millard's wife, Patricia Aldridge.
My wife answered the phone and kind of quiet for a minute, and she said, "You need to talk to Trish, there's something wrong with your brother, he's missing." I got on the phone with her. I said, "If you don't know where he's at and you can't go home," I said, "call the police."
20 minutes later, a Huntington police officer arrives at the Aldridge residence. Patricia explains that she last saw her 42-year-old husband at 7:30 that morning.
My brother was supposed to have a recall on his car done at 8 o'clock.
She stated that he had taken the van that she usually drove and parked it out on the street, and then had given her a hug and told her he'd meet her for lunch at about 11 o'clock. Patricia had gone to Walmart and to the bank and had returned home shortly before 11 o'clock, and Millard was not there.
She then proceeded on to work. Patricia said that while she was at work, she made several phone calls trying to find Millard, was not able to do so.
Millard, you could pretty much set a clock by. He was very reliable on his daily life.
She became very worried, and so about 2 o'clock that afternoon, she returned home.
Patricia says her concerns grew when she entered the couple's detached garage.
She went back to the garage to see if he was there, and she found bloodstains on the floor. She then contacted her brother and called the police.
So what they originally thought might be a missing person became something more sinister in nature.
When detectives arrive, they begin processing the scene and speak with Patricia.
She said that Millard was a cameraman for WSAZ. At that point, I recognized who he was.
He would come to the courthouse and interview prosecutors after the conclusion of cases. He always seemed like a very nice guy.
Born and raised in Huntington, Millard Aldridge came from humble beginnings.
Our life was simple. We were country people. My dad worked every day. My mother was a housewife, and she did side jobs at times. I had one brother, and I have one sister. We're only 3 years apart in ages, so we were pretty tight-knit. We went to CK High School, but unfortunately, he didn't get to graduate from there. My dad had got hurt and was off work, and both of us ended up having to quit school and get jobs to make sure that we didn't lose our home. He had got an interview for a janitor's position for WSAZ Channel 3, and luckily he got it.
With a keen eye for photography, Millard quickly found a new career path.
He worked his way up to be a journalist, photojournalist.
He loved what he did. He felt like he was making a difference in our community by, helping report the news in the Huntington area.
Him becoming a photojournalist like he did was destined to be his thing. That was his calling.
2 years into his career at WSAZ, Millard married his high school sweetheart.
They had a little girl first, and then they had a little boy.
Millard was a great father. He loved his kids. He took care of his kids.
Millard was such a caring person. He never put himself first. He was just an all-around great man.
He gave it everything he had to make it work, but they ended up getting a divorce. He was probably single for about 4 years, and then he met Trish. Next thing I know, he's in love, and he wants to marry her.
Trish was always out for a good time, always laughing and making jokes. I thought she was great because she was making Millard happy.
She seemed like she was going to be a true partner for him for the rest of his life.
Patricia had one child from a previous marriage, and he treated her, Jennifer, like his own daughter. She loved Millard to death. It might not have been her birth dad, but that was her dad.
And then they had a son shortly after they were married.
He was happy and proud. That's what he wanted out of his life. He wanted to be a loving father and a husband.
While Millard continued to build a successful career at WSAZ, Patricia pursued her own interests.
She was real good sewing and stuff like that. She had her own business, which was called A Stitch in Time.
She would make things for people, costumes and outfits and blankets and different things. Millard and Trish, they seemed happy as a couple, like they were gonna grow old together and sit on the front porch in a rocking chair.
But after nearly 2 decades of marriage, the couple's future is suddenly in jeopardy.
With the finding of the bloodstains in the garage, that elevated things quite a bit.
Once the area was secured, then the forensic investigators came in.
I observed a 55-gallon size garbage can that had been turned over. Looked like a struggle took place.
The blood splatter indicated that this was a very violent attack. It looked more like what we would typically refer to as a rage killing.
Coming up, authorities discover a second crime scene.
Generally speaking, the purpose for burning a vehicle is to destroy evidence.
And a tip to law enforcement puts a suspect in their crosshairs.
When human emotions are set ablaze like this, you don't know where the fire's going to go.
Hours after 42-year-old Millard Aldridge was reported missing by his wife, Patricia, investigators in Huntington, West Virginia, find evidence of a violent attack in the couple's garage.
We didn't find any weapons inside the garage, but there was a blood swipe on the floor. It looked to me like somebody had tried to use something to maybe clean up the blood pool.
What was reported missing from the garage was Millard Aldridge and Millard Aldridge's vehicle, but there were no reports that anything else significant was taken from the garage.
There were no signs of break-in at all. Didn't appear to be a robbery gone bad. Someone had gained entry, either had access to the garage or was familiar with it in some way.
Investigators canvassed the Aldridge's neighborhood, hoping that someone saw Millard leave home on his own.
This is the Westmoreland neighborhood of Huntington. It's a kind of a bed and breakfast family neighborhood, so for this to have happened was very shocking. The canvass turned up no results. There was nothing unusual that was noted either during that day, the night before.
The next step the investigators would take would be to put him into the National Crime Database, the NCIC, and it alerts law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for this missing person or this vehicle.
Trish, she was worried about Millard, nervous because she didn't know where he was at. The whole family was hoping that he was still alive, but everybody was just in shock, total shock.
I felt I had to do something to try to help find my brother. Me and my sons and my nephew, we jumped in my van and we went on back roads that we used to run when we was kids.
Our hearts were sinking, hoping still that he would be found alive, but there was less hope of that happening.
Nearly 24 hours into their search, Huntington police receive a call from neighboring Cabell County.
A burnt vehicle was found up on 8th Street Road. Immediately, there was the suspicion that this might be Millard's missing car.
The vehicle was destroyed to such an extent that they could not make any determination of what make, model, or serial number might exist there.
There was a license plate that had been burned in half, but you could still read the first 3 digits. And the first 3 digits on that license plate did correspond to the first 3 digits of Millard Aldridge's vehicle.
So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put 2 and 2 together. It was pretty safe to assume that this was Millard's vehicle. Generally speaking, the purpose for burning a vehicle is to destroy evidence. So it was prudent to do a search in that area. We had a lot of people out there. We had people from the Sheriff's Department, a volunteer group. The news had camera crews out there covering as much of the search as they could. A lot of the people that he worked with, they were all there. And it was a somber moment for everybody.
West Virginia State Police participated in the search of the area, and it included cadaver dogs.
Less than a quarter mile into the woods, investigators make a gruesome discovery.
The body was maybe 10 to 15 feet over an embankment over the hillside.
It was in a state of decomposition.
And it was pretty apparent that there were some severe injuries to the face and head, enough to the point that he could not be immediately identified.
We got the phone call, said, we found a body and we think it's Millard. I was asked to go help identify the body. Now, the hardest thing to do is identify your brother, but the only way I could do it was because when he was a young man, he thought he wanted a tattoo, an initial M on his shoulder. And another thing, he had a scar on his right leg, and that's basically how I was able to identify my brother. I didn't know what to do then. I mean, I kind of fell to my knees.
That immediately changed things from a missing person to a homicide investigation. When the body was carried out of the woods, Patricia was there with a couple of family members, and she did break down, kind of collapsed.
She was just absolutely devastated. I mean, crying beyond consoling. It was just a sick feeling. How could someone do something to take his life?
The sad irony of Millard's career, which was to put the stories of others on camera, is that his horrible and untimely death played out on camera and in the media that he served.
They had EMTs to transport Millard to the medical examiner's office to have an autopsy done on him.
The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was the severe blunt force trauma to the head.
This is consistent with the blood evidence that was found at the crime scene, and the ME's report described a dozen injuries, one of which was so severe it caused several fractures to the head and face. For somebody to be not just beaten to death, but beaten multiple times to death indicates that there was a lot of rage involved in this crime.
It didn't look like it could be a random type of crime. It looked more overkill. It seems very personal.
It was somebody of either size or strength, or both. And so clearly, we're probably not looking at a woman or somebody of small stature. That caused us to go back and talk to family members and try to get an idea of who might be responsible for this type of a crime.
We're racking our brain trying to figure out who would want to hurt him. He was the best man you could ask for as a friend, a father, a son, a brother. Nobody in the family or the neighborhood would ever guess that somebody would hate him. Nobody.
While interviewing Millard's family, detectives sit down with his 18-year-old stepdaughter, Jennifer.
Jennifer had information she might be able to provide with regard to the relationship between her mother and father.
By all outward appearances, this was an ideal marriage.
But Jennifer exposes a crack in her family's picture-perfect veneer.
In speaking to her, detectives learned that Patricia had an affair with a guy named Mitchell Vickers.
Given the statements, they have to explore Mitch Vickers. You know, who's Mitch Vickers? Is he the type of person that could have harmed Millard Aldridge because of this affair?
2 days into Millard Aldridge's murder investigation, authorities in Huntington, West Virginia have a promising lead. According to Millard's stepdaughter, Jennifer, his wife, Patricia, was having an affair with a man named Mitchell Vickers.
In speaking to her, detectives learned that Patricia would meet with Mitchell Vickers at Jennifer's apartment. Jennifer had disclosed to us that she'd having knowledge about the affair, just her general dislike and suspicions of Vickers, and this box of letters that she got from Patricia. A bunch of love letters between Patricia and Vickers. Jennifer mentioned that Vickers had threatened her if she disclosed the relationship to Millard Aldridge. She was scared of him. We ran his name, ended up pulling a jacket on him. Vickers had a fairly extensive record. He was what you might call a career criminal.
Mitch Vickers was from the Barbersville area of Cabell County, which is just east of the city of Huntington. He'd been involved in a lot of thefts and things like that, and had had legal trouble in Florida and had been incarcerated there.
He had recently, we discovered, been convicted of a couple of burglaries and had worked out a plea deal. Having pled guilty to those charges, he had asked for a delayed report date because his mother was in bad health.
He was permitted to be released from jail and was to report on June 29th to the authorities in Cabell County to be transported to the prison.
Detectives realized Mitchell had been released nearly a week before Millard was reported missing.
Mitchell Vickers is a person who is very large. He is strong. He's capable of extreme violence. And so the nature of the injuries combined with the knowledge of the affair immediately moved Mitchell Vickers up to the top of the possible suspects list. It raises questions. With the discovery of the affair, it's now necessary to go back and talk to Patricia.
Detectives immediately contact Patricia at her home and press her about the state of her marriage.
Very shortly after the investigators begin to question her, she admits to the affair with Mitch Vickers.
Patricia admits that the affair began less than a year earlier in December of 1997. But her ties to Mitchell Vickers began decades earlier.
Mitch Vickers and Patricia Aldridge had a relationship when they were much younger, back in the 70s. Mitch Vickers had moved away and they separated, but when Mitch returned to town in 1997, they were reacquainted by one of Patricia's friends.
They reconnected, and that grew from there into a full-fledged physical affair.
I have to believe that the attraction to Mitchell Vickers, to Patricia, was the fact that he was almost the polar opposite of Millard. Whereas Millard was a stable guy with a job, was a law-abiding guy, and Mitchell Vickers was a bad boy, in and out of prison.
Patricia talked about Vickers being rearrested in February of '98. And so when he goes back into jail, she told detectives that she ended the affair with Vickers.
She insists that she's not involved, she's innocent, she loved her husband, and at that point, Patricia indicates that she's not sure if Mitchell Vickers is involved.
As detectives are wrapping up their interview, Patricia steps away to take a phone call.
Patricia says, "Hey, I've got somebody wants to talk to you."
The person identifies as Mitchell Vickers on the phone, and he said, "I'm the one that did it. I'm the one that killed that SOB."
He said, "Just leave my lady alone. She didn't have nothing to do with it."
The obvious reaction immediately is just amazement.
We didn't know if it was a love story gone bad. We didn't know exactly what the motive was.
We had a little bit of a suspicion that perhaps Patricia had called him and convinced him to talk to the police. In addition to confessing, Vickers had also offered to surrender himself and gave us an address and location to find him.
The detectives immediately leave to try to make contact with Mr. Vickers.
At this point, he's not just a suspect, he's the suspect.
Coming up, detectives come face to face with Mitchell Vickers, and an unexpected motive emerges.
I love this lady from my heart. How can I go to jail knowing that this ass is going to be out here beating on her?
I never had a confession that was quite like this.
He had no remorse whatsoever.
"48 hours after Huntington police recovered Millard Aldridge's body, his wife's lover, 40-year-old Mitchell Vickers, surrenders to authorities."
It gives a location for them to pick him up. When they encounter him, he's in a truck. He gets out of the truck. He's shirtless, and they obviously put him in a cruiser and transported him to be interviewed.
The detectives take him to the barracks in Cabell County, and Mitchell Vickers voluntarily gives a statement at that time. In his statement, Mitchell Vickers talked about his relationship with Patricia Aldridge and the fact that they were in love with each other.
I run around with some friends of mine. Their girlfriend knows Trish, and somehow my name came up. And we decided that we would meet and just kind of discuss what you've been doing with your life for the last 18 years. First time we met at the Cono Lodge. It's before Christmas. It's very obvious we still had feelings for each other. One thing led to the other, and I fell back in love with her.
Vickers stated that the reason why he killed Millard Aldridge was because Patricia had told him that Millard was very abusive.
She has told me things that, for instance, that Millard was nothing but a drug. He beat on her, he slaps her around. He treats you like a piece of.
According to Mitchell, things came to a head when he was recently sentenced for his burglary charges.
I went berserk. I went crazy. I love this lady from my heart. How can I go to jail knowing that this ass is going to be out here beating on her? And I decided, man, no, I'm going to prison. I'm going to put a stop to this. I can't have her. I know I can't. But other goddamn, I'm not going to let nobody else have her.
What did you decide to do?
I found her address. I went down there. I walked in her garage approximately 4:30 that morning.
And how did you get into their garage?
The door was open. I waited and I waited. Daylight came, and it was probably 7, 8 o'clock. I guess he finally come out of the garage and carrying a bag of trash with him.
Vickers said that when Millard entered the garage, Vickers attacked him, first with a pipe, and then beat him with a claw hammer, and then stabbed him with a screwdriver.
And then I grabbed a crescent wrench, which was hanging on the wall. I grabbed it. I started beating him in the head. He was screaming, Trish, help! Trish, help! And I told him, I'm sending you to hell, boy. You.
This one was a chilling confession because of the cold and calculating manner in which he spoke about murdering someone. I never had a confession that was quite like this.
When I knew that he was dead, I drug him around, stowed him in the trunk of his car. I walked over because I was trying to clean up my mess. I let his blood trail from hell.
Okay. What did you do after that?
Vickers describes driving the car up to 8th Street Road near Skyview Drive. He disposed of the body, dropping it over the side of the hill, and then poured gasoline on the car and set it on fire. Then hitched a ride back to town.
I didn't know I could do anything like this, but I cannot let somebody beat up on somebody I love.
He seemed to be extremely proud. He leaned back in the chair, arms folded, shirtless, as if he were bragging about what he'd done.
Almost as if he's trying to make himself out to be the hero rather than the bad guy in this.
This ain't got nothing to do with his. Now I'm saying it's all on my own. Trish didn't know anything about this.
Vickers was extremely adamant about taking all of the blame himself, and that just even more raised suspicions because if Patricia wasn't involved, there would be no reason for him to even mention her.
Following his confession, Mitchell is transported to the Huntington Police Department to be charged with first-degree murder. News crews eagerly await his arrival.
The suspect reportedly called police to confess to the murder of WSAZ photographer Millard Aldridge. Where does he belong?
Long in hell, just where I sent him.
I was at Millard's house with Trish and Millard's mom, and it come on the news. And Mitch Vickers is on there. They've got him in handcuffs. He's cussing everybody, saying that Millard was a terrible person. He deserved to die. He was a wife beater and a child abuser. I mean, we're all in shock. Glad that they arrested him. But where did he get this information from?
He also apparently had a motive.
He said it was over a relationship with a woman.
When investigators circle back to Millard's family members, they say that, in hindsight, they believe Millard must have been suspicious of his wife's infidelity.
I could tell that something was bothering him a lot. Patricia wasn't really paying attention to him like she was, and she wasn't the happy-go-lucky smile. I think he might have kind of knew, but he didn't want to know. He didn't want it to be real.
You could tell Patricia was a little bit nervous about all of it, but she was still trying to act like the innocent person in all this. A lot of what I felt was a gut feeling that she wasn't being truthful.
Family members are adamant that Millard has never been abusive.
Everybody that knows him knows he wasn't.
All of that kind of raised red flags. Everything we had up to that point said, no, that's not true.
Since Patricia had allegedly fed this information to Mitchell, investigators have growing doubts about her story. Looking for clues, they compare her previous statements to the forensic evidence found at the scene and hit pay dirt.
Luminol was applied to the crime scene in the garage, and it was apparent that there had been a vehicle parked where the violence had taken place. It cast a lot of doubt to the explanation Patricia gave about Millard parking the van in front of the house before leaving. So we wanted to take a closer look at the van.
There are a lot of unanswered questions at this point.
Patricia had made a statement that The last time she saw Millard was when he pulled her vehicle from the garage around to the front of the house and parked it along the curb. We went back to examine Patricia's van, and it didn't take long to find some blood stains. There was a couple of stains that were on the passenger side rearview mirror, but then I looked up in the wheel well up above the tire, and that's where I saw a lot of impact spatter, meaning that that portion of the vehicle would have been adjacent to the beating as the beating was taking place.
That says the van had to be in the garage when the blood got on it.
It made it very plain and obvious to me at that point that she was lying.
Investigators immediately bring Patricia Aldridge into the station for questioning.
At this time, Patricia was confronted with this evidence, and she indicates that she wants a lawyer.
Clearly, she knew about it and had some kind of involvement in it.
Investigators don't have enough evidence to hold Patricia, so they let her go. On June 27th, a local couple contacts police after seeing Vickers' arrest on the news.
The day after Mitchell Vickers was arrested, the police received a telephone call from Cheryl Kowalski.
Cheryl Kowalski is a friend of Patricia's. Cheryl's husband, Ronald, had spent time in jail with Mitchell Vickers.
Cheryl says in January of 1998, Mitchell contacted her husband Ronald with a proposal.
Cheryl tells police that Mitchell Vickers had approached her husband and offered money to kill Millard Aldridge.
So detectives interviewed Ronald Kowalski. He provided the corroborating information.
He had a video that showed Patricia Aldridge and Mitchell Vickers at his home Christmas of 1997.
Patricia was sitting on Vickers' lap and kissing him, hugging him, essentially carrying on like teenagers.
A month later, Mitchell had returned to Ron and Cheryl's home.
Ron said that Vickers had approached him, asked him if he wanted to earn some money.
He had been offered $7,500 to kill Millard Aldridge, but he refuses.
According to Ronald, it wasn't just Mitchell who wanted Millard dead.
According to Ron, there was another time where he was approached, this time Patricia Aldridge and Vickers together. Patricia asked Ron if he would be willing to kill her husband and described that she wanted him out of the picture.
The statement of the Kowalskis are important because it doesn't isolate Mitchell Vickers as being a lone person seeking to have Millard Aldridge killed. It clearly shows that this was a joint enterprise on their part.
As for why Patricia wanted her husband dead, her friends believe they know the answer.
Patricia had described that the reason she couldn't leave her husband was because it all boiled down to money. She couldn't make it financially on her own.
When investigators obtain the Aldridge's financial records, they learn why.
Patricia was a seamstress. She had a business called Stitch and Time that eventually went bankrupt and closed.
Millard Aldridge worked for WSAZ TV here in Huntington, and they had a policy that if their employee got killed, they would pay a year's salary to that employee's beneficiary. I was talking with the bookkeeper at WSAZ, and I will never forget what the lady said to me. She said, "Honey, that's not where the money is." She said, "It's in his 401k. I said, "How much?" And she said, "Around $250,000.
Mitchell Vickers is in custody for the confessed murder of Millard Aldridge. But now friends of Millard's wife, Patricia, have come forward accusing her of being a co-conspirator.
Patricia indicates to some friends that she was not financially able to make it on her own by merely divorcing him, and that eliminating him was the solution to her problem. She would have been the beneficiary of the 401k and the life insurance policy, so there was at least $300,000 there that she would have received. On July 1, 1998, through his attorney, Mitchell Vickers had made contact with the prosecuting attorney's office and agreed to give an additional statement.
He's been informed that the original motive that he gave, the belief that Millard was abusive towards Patricia, was false. Once he's confronted with that information, it becomes clear to him that, at least in some part, he was used by Patricia. And so he's no longer shielding her from everything that happened.
I love Trish. I love this lady from my heart. Okay? She made us both love me. She got me to believing, without a doubt, her husband was a real prick. I don't even know the man.
He detailed the motive for the crime being the financial motive.
She'd been wanting to get rid of him for a long time. She offered me $10,000. She asked me to do it, and finally I agreed to it.
And so he describes Patricia having set things up at the house. She disabled a motion light. She unlocked the door to the garage.
He explained that he committed the act after Millard walked into the garage, and that he stuffed Millard's body in the trunk, took the car up to A Street Road, Skyview Drive area, dumped Millard's body out.
She was right behind me in her van, with gas all over the car, inside and out. Twitched it, jumped in her van. We took off.
Patricia then drove him to Walmart, where she gets him a change of clothes.
And she took me from there, took me over to a buddy of mine's house on high and dropped me off. That's when I guess she went home and did the report.
So the additional information that Vickers now gives us further cemented Patricia's involvement in this murder.
She is a principal of the crime, just like the person who wielded the hammer. So at this point, she will be charged with first-degree murder.
On July 3rd, Millard Aldridge is laid to rest surrounded by friends and family, including Patricia.
We're at the funeral home, and her still doing the boo-hoo, poor widow, what about me thing.
We all knew that she was involved. It was so hard for all of us to just grin and bear it.
We got to the cemetery, and they lowered his coffin into the ground, and we started filling it up.
That's when the police came up and arrested her. Poetic justice of her getting arrested at the cemetery. That was just karma.
Just a week after her husband Millard was found beaten to death, his wife was arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
Despite confessing to Millard's murder, Mitchell Vickers takes his chances at trial on May 4th, 1999.
We had corroborating evidence, but the most compelling evidence was his confession.
I knew I was down here murdering man. I come here for a reason to kill him.
Mitchell Vickers was found guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life without mercy.
We would have preferred the death penalty, but West Virginia doesn't really have that on the table.
Patricia Aldridge's trial gets underway on August 24th, 1999.
So we had to connect all those dots to clearly show that she was intimately involved in the planning and the murder of her husband.
It was hard to find out how much involvement she had. Just having Millard murdered by her lover was bad enough. But to find out that she helped plan everything?
A death for hire. That's what it was. she was the mastermind of it all.
Her selfishness, her greed, everything is about her.
Mitch killed Millard because he loved Trish. He would do anything for her.
Well, affairs deal with human emotions, and human emotions are set ablaze like this. You don't know where the fire's going to go.
On August 26th, Patricia takes the stand, attempting to refute the state's claim that this was a cold-blooded conspiracy.
Patricia Aldridge maintained that she may have been involved with Mitchell Vickers, but that he took it upon himself to do this. Mr. Vickers testified in her trial and recanted his second statement that she was involved.
It was just total selfish stupidity on my part to drag an innocent person in such a serious charge situation that I'm in. She didn't do anything bad.
In Mitchell Vickers' world, one of the worst things you can be is a snitch. And as much as anything, he may well have testified at that trial to rid himself of being a snitch. Mitch Vickers truly loved her, and I think he tried to save her one last time.
Following a 3-day trial, the jury reaches a verdict.
Patricia Aldridge was found guilty of first-degree murder. Her sentence was life in prison with no possibility of parole.
They got exactly what they deserved. And I don't lose a minute of sleep over it.
There are two basic motives that come forward in this particular case. One is money, plain old-fashioned greed. The other is love gone wrong. Put those two things together, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
I think it was just a fatal attraction that they just couldn't get out of their system.
Patricia, I really don't understand how you could do this and tear a family up and take a great man, not just from us, but your kids, his kids. How could you do this? I just wish he was here. I wish he was here.
My brother will be remembered in our family, to me.
The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence in Chicago that presses down on your chest, making every distant siren scream louder, every rustle of leaves sound like a warning. On June 12, 1998, the city's west side held its breath. A young woman, barely 22, vanished without a trace. Her name was Emily Harper. She had left her apartment after dinner, a routine walk to the corner store, nothing more. The next morning, her front door was still locked, the faint aroma of vanilla candles still lingering, her purse untouched. Friends reported her missing. Police arrived at the scene, combing the small, cluttered apartment. Every room pristine except for the subtle disturbance. A chair slightly turned, a window unlocked, though the wind that night had been still. The initial investigation produced nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no witnesses, no ransom notes. Just the chilling whisper of absence, echoing in the concrete corridors of a city that had seen too many disappearances. Emily was described as bright, ambitious, someone who smiled at strangers, yet she carried a quiet caution about her. Her neighbors remembered her as friendly but reserved, the type who waved politely without lingering in conversation. Her coworkers at the publishing house spoke of her diligence, her careful attention to detail, her habit of staying late to finish editing manuscripts. But none of that mattered now. She was gone. Within the first 48 hours, the police released a statement, calling it a missing person case, but the fear was immediate. The community whispered about abductions, stranger danger, the things that parents warn their children about, but hope never come true. Posters went up. Friends canvassed the streets. Every lead seemed to dissolve into dead ends. The West Side was no stranger to crime, but even in a city hardened by violence, the disappearance of Emily Harper carried a weight that unsettled residents. People began to talk in hushed tones about cold cases, those unresolved crimes that fester in the back pages of newspapers, gathering dust in police archives. Emily's case slipped quietly into that category after months without answers. Detectives assigned to the case noted small inconsistencies in witness statements, fleeting shadows in the timeline, but nothing concrete enough to follow. Every potential lead turned brittle in their hands. Every call to the police tip line faded into silence. Weeks became months. Months became years. And still, the cold case file remained unopened, a chilling testament to the unknown. In the early months, detectives pursued the usual angles. Friends and family were interviewed multiple times, their stories cross-checked, their alibis verified. Her apartment was dusted for fingerprints, her last known whereabouts reconstructed meticulously. Security footage from the corner store was reviewed, but the cameras had poor resolution, capturing only a blur of movement that could have been anyone. The employees remembered seeing her enter, carrying her small tote bag, but nothing more. Nothing that hinted at danger. Nothing that hinted at the horror that was quietly unfolding just beyond their line of sight. Rumors spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some said Emily had run away, tired of her mundane life, seeking adventure in the city's darker corners. Others whispered about a stranger lurking in the alleys, watching, waiting. The police dismissed many of these claims as idle speculation, yet the unease grew. At night, windows were shuttered, doors bolted, children were kept inside. Chicago's summer heat pressed down, thick with the scent of gasoline, hot asphalt, and the faint tang of fear that hung in the air like smoke. Every missing person poster on a lamppost seemed to leer at passers-by, a constant reminder that the city was never as safe as it appeared. Detective Marcus Lane, a veteran of over 20 years on the force, took a personal interest in the case. Lane had seen the worst, from gang violence to organized crime, but Emily's disappearance gnawed at him. He revisited the crime scene repeatedly, pacing the apartment, examining angles, looking for something everyone else had missed. He noted the subtle disturbance, the chair, the window, the faint smudge on the threshold, but nothing conclusive. Lane's instinct screamed that this was not a random disappearance, not an impulsive act. Someone had planned it, and that someone was still out there. He kept a notebook, scribbling observations, potential suspects, inconsistencies in reports. His obsession grew quietly, almost unnoticed, as the city moved on. By the end of the year, Emily's case had gone cold, classified officially as a cold case by the Chicago Police Department. Lane refused to let go. He reviewed old files, cross-referenced unsolved crimes in the area, and noticed a pattern. Other young women had disappeared in a similar radius over the previous decade, each case dismissed after minimal leads. The thought that a single perpetrator could be behind multiple disappearances made his stomach tighten. The community, meanwhile, tried to normalize the fear, carrying on with life, but glancing nervously at alleys, abandoned buildings, and the shadowed corners of parking lots. For years, the case gathered dust, yet never truly disappeared. Lane, even after retirement, revisited the files, following new leads that technology now offered. In 2018, DNA testing had advanced to a point unimaginable in 1998. What once was a blur, a cold trace of evidence, could now be analyzed for genetic markers, compared against national databases. Lane, still consulting occasionally for the department, suggested re-examining Emily's apartment items, dusted for prints in 1998, but never matched with today's technology. Among the mundane, her tote bag, a forgotten scarf, and a letter from her sister. Lane noticed a minute fiber on the scarf, barely visible, previously dismissed as contamination. This fiber would become the key that had eluded investigators for a quarter of a century. Meanwhile, the city had changed. The West Side bore scars of gentrification and neglect, abandoned buildings replaced by new condos, empty lots overgrown with weeds. Old neighbors moved away, and memories faded, yet the whisper of Emily Harper lingered. Cold case units opened files occasionally, scanning databases, hoping for a break. And then, something unusual happened. A man walked into the Chicago Police Department claiming knowledge about Emily's disappearance. He was older now, his face lined with age and worry, but he spoke with a chilling clarity. He confessed, calmly, almost resignedly, to actions that shocked the community to its core. Lane, now brought back to consult, listened as the man recounted every detail, the planning, the abduction, the concealment. He spoke as if reading from script, yet the horror in his words made the walls of the precinct tremble. The confession was verified, corroborated by DNA evidence, matched perfectly with the fiber found all those years ago. The cold case, frozen in time for 25 years, had finally cracked open. Lane, standing outside the precinct after the arrest, looked at the city skyline, at the buildings that had watched over Emily's disappearance and the years of fear that followed. The relief was tempered by sorrow, by the realization that justice had come too late for the life stolen. News outlets swarmed, headlines screamed, communities gasped in disbelief. Chicago's West Side, once haunted by an unsolved disappearance, now confronted the truth, raw and unflinching. The man, now facing trial, remained eerily calm, showing no remorse, only a mechanical acknowledgement of guilt. For Lane, for the community, the relief of closure was shadowed by decades of uncertainty, the haunting question of how such evil had gone unnoticed for so long. In coffee shops, in living rooms, in office cubicles, people recounted the story, the shock, the twists, and the chilling simplicity of the confession. Emily's name became more than a memory. It became a symbol of persistence, of investigation, and of the unnerving fact that even the most ordinary routines can conceal extraordinary horror. The cold case had finally found its resolution, yet the psychological impact rippled across the city. Parents clutched their children tighter, neighbors observed each other with new vigilance, and a legacy of Emily Harper endured as a cautionary tale. Lane, returning home after long days of interviews and public statements, would sometimes catch himself staring into the darkness, recalling the details, the fiber, the confession, the sequence of events that led to justice after 25 years. Even in victory, the echoes of terror remained. The city moved forward, but the memory of that June night, the vanished young woman, and the unrelenting hunt for answers lingered in every shadowed alley and every flickering streetlight. The files were archived once more, now marked closed. Yet the story of Emily Harper, the cold case that endured a quarter-century, refused to fade. It reminded Chicago of the fragility of safety, the persistence of evil, and the relentless determination of those who refuse to let go. And even now, when the wind whispers through the empty streets of the West Side, one can almost hear it, soft, haunting, a reminder that behind every cold case is a life, a story, and the unyielding quest for truth. The confession had sent shockwaves through Chicago, yet the community's unease was far from over. Even with the man in custody, even with DNA confirming the truth, there lingered an unsettled question. How many other lives had intersected with his darkness? Detectives combed through his past, digging into every address, every former employer, every casual acquaintance. Each thread uncovered fragments of potential victims, cold whispers of disappearances that may have gone unnoticed, anonymous calls to the police that had been lost or ignored. Lane watched as the investigation expanded like a web, intricate and suffocating, each strand carrying the weight of fear. Families who had mourned quietly for decades were suddenly forced to reopen wounds, to face the possibility that their loved ones' fates were tied to a single shadow lurking unseen among them. In Emily Harper's neighborhood, people began noticing details they had once dismissed. A figure that seemed out of place in the evening, a car idling too long on quiet streets, the faint echo of footsteps where none should be. Memories that had been buried, small, seemingly insignificant, surfaced with alarming clarity. A neighbor recalled seeing a man near the alley behind Emily's apartment, lingering as if waiting, disappearing when asked why he was there. Another remembered a brief exchange in a grocery store, a strange insistence in his eyes, a name he never revealed. Alone, these incidents seemed trivial, easily ignored. Together, however, they formed a mosaic of intent, a chilling portrait of a predator whose patience had allowed him to evade justice for decades. Detective Lane pored over every photograph, every piece of evidence from 1998, tracing patterns that were invisible to the casual eye. He revisited the corner store security tapes, enhanced the images using technology unavailable at the time, and froze frames of fleeting motion that had once been dismissed as blur. The movements of shoppers, the flicker of shadows across the street, subtle changes in lighting. Each clue became a potential breadcrumb leading to understanding the final moments of Emily Harper's life. Lane could almost see her silhouette in the footage, the tote bag swinging gently, the cautious steps of someone unaware that danger had found her. The realization that this predator had watched, studied, and waited struck him with visceral force. Meanwhile, the man's confession revealed details so precise, so methodical, that even seasoned investigators struggled to process them. He described her apartment, the small shifts in furniture, the scent of candles, the exact placement of the tote bag. He recounted the journey from her building to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, every turn and alley memorized, every decision calculated. The calmness with which he spoke was almost clinical, each word measured to avoid revealing too much, yet dripping with the horror of his actions. Lane noted that his timeline matched certain anomalies in witness statements, confirming the accuracy of his memory, even after 25 years. The realization that a mind could retain such precise details of malevolence for decades was terrifying in itself. The community's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and vindication. For 25 years, Emily's name had been whispered in hushed tones, a symbol of a life stolen and a case unsolved. Now, the truth emerged in all its disturbing clarity. Parents clutched their children, wondering if they had ever unknowingly brushed past someone capable of such calculated cruelty. Friends debated whether the justice system had finally caught up, or if 25 years of terror had already taken its toll on the fabric of the neighborhood. Lane observed the media frenzy with a detached sense of necessity. The story needed to be told, but every interview, every headline carried the potential to reopen wounds and deepen scars. The investigation did not end with the arrest. Officers went door to door, canvassing old neighborhoods, checking old records, and re-interviewing witnesses who had long ago moved on. Memories resurfaced with startling clarity. A brief glance from a stranger on a bus, a car parked overnight near the alley, an abandoned backpack. Lane realized that the city itself had been a silent witness, keeping secrets in every corner, every shadowed alleyway, every empty lot where the predator may have lingered. It was a labyrinth of human memory and urban landscape, each layer concealing potential answers, each turn revealing new terror. As the trial approached, tension gripped the city. Courtroom seats filled with journalists, survivors, neighbors, and those who had known Emily personally. Lane observed them all quietly, noting the combination of fear, curiosity, and longing for closure. The man sat impassive, almost blending into the sterile, gray walls of the courtroom, a figure of control and calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. Each day of testimony revealed more about the planning, the isolation, the methodical nature of his crime. Witnesses described their encounters with him, each recollection confirming the careful manipulation he had exercised to remain undetected for decades. Lane spent long nights reviewing transcripts, piecing together the narrative in his mind. He could see Emily in her final hours, the brief moments of awareness, the sudden realization of danger, the powerless struggle against fate. He imagined her footsteps echoing on the streets, the faint rustle of clothing as she moved, the sound of her heartbeat racing as she realized she had been followed. The man's voice, calm and unyielding in confession, became an eerie counterpoint to the chaos that had rippled through the city. Every detail matched, every movement accounted for, and yet the emotional weight of it pressed down on Lane like a physical force. The city itself seemed to respond to the revelation. Neighborhoods that had been quiet for years felt alive with nervous energy. Parents reevaluated safety measures, students discussed urban awareness in schools, and communities formed informal networks of vigilance. Yet beneath the surface, a deep unease persisted. The idea that evil could operate undetected, patiently, for decades, unsettled even the most hardened residents. Lane found himself walking the streets alone at night, retracing steps, imagining what had occurred in those alleys and abandoned lots. Every flicker of movement, every shadow cast by a streetlight, reminded him of the fragility of human perception and the persistence of hidden threats. Emily's family struggled to reconcile relief with grief. The knowledge of what had happened brought closure, but it could not restore the life lost, the stolen years, or the innocence shattered. Lane attended private sessions with the family, offering what solace he could, explaining the investigation, the breakthroughs in DNA technology, the painstaking cross-referencing of evidence. Each conversation was a reminder that justice, even when served, carries its own shadows, the echoes of trauma, the persistent absence, the haunting memory of what might have been. The cold case file, once a symbol of bureaucratic limitation, had become a testament to persistence, technology, and human determination. Lane reflected on the evolution of criminal investigation, the shift from intuition to forensic science, the power of DNA databases, the meticulous reconstruction of events decades after the fact. Yet he also acknowledged the limits of these tools. Even with confession, even with physical evidence, some questions remained unanswered. Why her? Why then? What impulses, what psychology drove a man to observe, plan, and act with such precision? These questions lingered, unanswerable, floating in the periphery of the city's collective consciousness. As the trial concluded and the verdict read, a sense of closure swept over the courtroom, yet the psychological residue persisted. Community members continued to share memories, to whisper about shadows and alleys, to recount strange encounters that had once seemed insignificant. Lane, watching from the back of the courtroom, understood that the case's impact extended beyond legal resolution. It had altered perceptions, deepened vigilance, and instilled a collective memory of caution and awareness. The man's arrest had not erased the years of uncertainty, the missed chances, the lingering fear. It had only confirmed the truth that had hovered in the shadows all along, waiting patiently to emerge. Even as news outlets published headline after headline, analyzing every angle of the case, the city's heartbeat carried a subtle tension. Emily Harper's story was now public knowledge, yet the psychological imprint of her disappearance and the decades of mystery remained. Lane continued his personal review, cataloging small lessons, noting the importance of observation, persistence, and the careful reconstruction of seemingly minor details. He walked past the corner store, past the apartment building, past the alleys and streets that had witnessed the unfolding of events, feeling the weight of history in every step. The West Side, scarred by memory, rebuilt its sense of security cautiously. Neighborhood watches were reinforced, informal patrols increased, and dialogue about safety became part of the community fabric. Yet in the quiet moments when the city seemed still, there remained a lingering whisper of absence, a reminder that a single life lost had left an indelible mark, that the past never fully disappears, and that cold cases, no matter how old, carry with them a haunting resonance that echoes through time. Even in the months that followed, Lane could not entirely detach himself from the case. Every new report, every missing person, every anomaly in the city's data seemed tied to a larger pattern, a reminder of the predator's capacity to remain unseen. The confession had ended the legal pursuit, but it could not erase the psychological vigilance that had become instinctive, nor the memory of Emily Harper, whose life had intersected with darkness and whose story had finally been told. Chicago breathed again, cautiously, but the West Side knew that vigilance is a lifelong pursuit. The city's shadows held secrets yet, stories yet untold, and lives that could vanish if not watched closely. Emily Harper's cold case had been solved, the killer confessed, and justice had, at last, been served, but the echoes of fear, the tension, the unanswered questions, and the haunting memory of absence would linger, threading through the streets, the neighborhoods, and the collective consciousness of a city forever changed. Even after the courtroom emptied, the city remained on edge. Lane returned to the west side, retracing streets he had walked countless times, each corner, alley, an abandoned lot a reminder of the years Emily Harper had been missing. The neighborhood seemed quieter, almost sterile, but beneath that calm lingered the residue of fear. Residents whispered about the man's methods, his patience, his ability to disappear in a plain sight, and how easily a stranger could weave into the ordinary rhythm of their lives unnoticed. Lane passed the corner store where Emily had stopped, the asphalt still bearing the faint echoes of hurried footsteps, the air still heavy with the memory of a life interrupted. The details of her last moments played relentlessly in his mind. The casual steps, the glance over her shoulder, the soft hum of the city masking the danger closing in. The confession had provided facts, dates, and locations, but it offered no comfort to those left behind. Lane studied the man's background in painstaking detail, uncovering a life meticulously constructed to mask his intentions. Every job he had held, every apartment he had rented, every casual friendship was a piece of camouflage, blending seamlessly into the fabric of the city. Even those closest to him could not have imagined the darkness lurking beneath mundane routines. Lane cataloged these details, each revelation sending a ripple of disbelief through him, as if the city itself was complicit in allowing such a predator to move unseen. It was a chilling reminder that evil often wears the guise of normalcy, hiding in plain sight while patience and calculation do their work. Investigators expanded the probe into his known haunts. Old parks, abandoned warehouses, dusty storage units, and dimly lit alleyways were scoured for evidence of prior crimes. Lane revisited witness statements from the late 1990s, cross-referencing them with modern insights. A man seen loitering near a train station in 1995, a van idling outside a closed bookstore in 1996, a shadowy figure at a laundromat in 1997. All of these details, once insignificant, form an ominous pattern when viewed through the lens of the confession. Lane's notes grew into a sprawling map of predation, each marker a chilling reminder that Emily's disappearance was not an isolated event, but part of a sequence of calculated, unnoticed acts. The psychological impact on the community was palpable. Parents watched children walk home from school with heightened vigilance. Neighbors engaged in quiet conversations, sharing observations they had previously dismissed. People began documenting small anomalies: a car parked too long, a door ajar, an unfamiliar figure lingering in the street. The city's pulse had shifted, every passerby a potential observer or predator. Lane understood this instinctual vigilance. It was a survival mechanism honed by years of unanswered questions, by decades of uncertainty. The confession had solved the cold case, but it could not erase the fear embedded in memory, nor the collective consciousness of a neighborhood forever altered. Lane also delved deeper into Emily's personal life, speaking with colleagues, friends, and family to reconstruct her final days with precision. Each conversation revealed subtle, often overlooked details: a phone call that ended abruptly, a missed meeting, a fleeting anxiety she hadn't shared. These fragments, combined with the confession, allowed Lane to reconstruct her routine with chilling accuracy. He could almost feel the tension in her steps as she approached the corner store that fateful night. The subtle intuition that perhaps something was off, a quiet, nagging instinct that was tragically powerless against the meticulously plotted danger awaiting her. The man's calm, methodical nature became a focal point for investigators and psychologists alike. Experts analyzed his behavior, trying to understand how someone could observe, plan, and act with such precision, remaining undetected for decades. Their analysis was clinical, detached, yet the conclusions were disturbing. Patience, cunning, and an absence of empathy allowed him to manipulate ordinary spaces into traps. Lane read through the reports, feeling a knot of unease tighten in his chest. The predator's ability to blend seamlessly, to exploit the mundane, to turn familiarity into vulnerability was almost unimaginable, yet it had happened. The city streets, the corridors of apartment buildings, the aisles of corner stores, all had been silent witnesses. Meanwhile, Emily's family grappled with a strange combination of relief and grief. Lane spent hours with them, reviewing the timeline, explaining how forensic advancements had finally led to confirmation of the man's confession. Yet the emotional weight of decades lost could not be erased. Birthdays, holidays, milestones that Emily would have celebrated were gone, memories that could never be reclaimed. Lane watched as they absorbed the grim reality. Closure was not salvation. It was acknowledgement, a way to frame grief in the context of truth. Their relief was tempered by sorrow, their satisfaction by the years of uncertainty, their peace by the realization that life does not pause for investigation. In parallel, the media amplified every detail, painting a portrait of meticulous predation and delayed justice. Headline after headline detailed Emily's disappearance, the confession, the investigation, and the extraordinary forensic breakthroughs. Social media erupted with commentary. Community forums discussed overlooked signs, and journalists re-examined similar cold cases across the nation, wondering how many predators had slipped through the cracks. Lane, observing this from the sidelines, noted the duality of public attention. It was both empowering and overwhelming. The city demanded narrative, understanding, and resolution. Yet the stark reality was messier, more haunting than any headline could convey. Even after the trial concluded, Lane continued to revisit the evidence. Photographs, statements, forensic reports, and maps of predation patterns were spread across his desk like a mosaic of obsession. He traced routes the man had taken, noting intersections, timing, environmental factors. Every detail revealed a man who viewed ordinary spaces as a chessboard, calculating moves with surgical precision. Lane found himself immersed in reconstruction exercises late into the night, imagining Emily's path, the predator's movements, and the moments where chance and routine collided with tragic consequence. Each reconstruction brought clarity, but also deepened the emotional weight, as if he were walking alongside history, witnessing horror while powerless to intervene. The community, meanwhile, began subtle rituals of remembrance. Plaques, small memorials, candlelight vigils. They honored Emily's life, acknowledging her presence in a city that had almost forgotten her. Children learned her name as part of urban safety awareness programs. Adults shared stories of resilience, and neighbors formed bonds strengthened by shared vigilance. Lane observed these acts quietly, recognizing that memory and awareness were the city's most potent forms of protection. Emily's life, though stolen, had become a symbol, a catalyst for a community determined not to ignore shadows in the future. As months passed, Lane's role evolved. He consulted on other cold cases, leveraging the insights gained from Emily's investigation. Patterns of methodical predation, delayed reporting, and overlooked details became critical lessons. He worked with younger detectives, emphasizing the importance of intuition, meticulous documentation, and revisiting old cases with fresh eyes. The story of Emily Harper, the cold case that endured 25 years, became more than an investigation. It became a template for understanding how darkness hides in ordinary spaces and how persistence, combined with advancing technology, can illuminate the shadows. Yet despite resolution, a sense of unease lingered. Lane noticed it in the quiet of the city at night. The way shadows shifted, the unaccounted glances of strangers, the faint sense that even solved cases leave ripples that cannot be contained. Emily's disappearance, once a source of terror, had transformed into a cautionary tale. Parents whispered to children about safety, neighbors reinforced vigilance, and the city moved forward with caution stitched into its fabric. Lane understood that the psychological impact of the cold case would outlast headlines, verdicts, and confessions. Fear, once entrenched, is not easily erased. Late one evening, Lane returned to Emily's former apartment, now occupied by new tenants. He walked slowly through the rooms, observing the angles of light, the placement of furniture, the echoes of memory that seemed to linger in the corners. The apartment felt ordinary, almost mundane, yet the history embedded in the walls was palpable. Lane reflected on the journey from disappearance to confession, from uncertainty to legal closure, and felt the weight of years. The persistence required to chase a shadow, the patience to uncover truth, the emotional toll of witnessing trauma and loss. Emily Harper's story, while resolved legally, remained a haunting presence in the West Side, in the city, and in Lane's mind. The cold case, frozen in time for a quarter century, had become a living lesson. Evil can hide in plain sight, patience can mask intent, and resolution often arrives long after the trauma has taken root. Lane understood that his vigilance, the community's awareness, and the meticulous nature of the investigation were all intertwined threads in the tapestry of truth, each thread necessary to illuminate a life that had been stolen. And so the city moved forward cautiously, aware, and watchful. The confession had brought justice, yet it could not erase the past. Shadows remained, vigilance endured, and the memory of Emily Harper continued to ripple through the streets, alleys, and buildings that had once borne silent witness to her disappearance. Lane walked the streets at night, imagining the paths of countless others who might have encountered the predator, acknowledging the fragility of human awareness, and understanding that even solved cold cases carry echoes of fear, grief, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Even after the confession, Chicago's West Side remained a city on edge. The arrest of the man who had abducted Emily Harper did not erase the years of fear, nor the countless moments where ordinary citizens had unknowingly brushed against danger. Lane returned to the streets at night, his footsteps echoing against the pavement, the city breathing quietly around him. Streetlights flickered in the humid summer air, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally, as if the darkness itself remembered the horrors of the past. Lane's eyes scanned every corner, every alley, every abandoned lot. He could almost feel the city's memory pressing against him, whispering names, incidents, and moments that had once been overlooked. The man's confession had been chillingly precise, recounting Emily's movements in detail. The slight hesitation at the corner store, the glances over her shoulder, the rhythm of her steps, all cataloged and memorized. Lane studied the confession alongside old evidence, realizing that subtle details had been present all along. Faint footprints in alley dirt, a slightly ajar fire escape, the glint of a car parked too long near her apartment. These were not mistakes or coincidences. They were elements of a carefully choreographed plan executed with patient cruelty. Lane traced each step on city maps, recreating the predator's route, noting the intersections, blind spots, and points of concealment. It was a maze of normalcy twisted into danger, a testament to the predator's calculated patience. Meanwhile, the psychological toll on the community began to manifest in subtle ways. Parents became hyper-aware, watching children cross streets, noting unfamiliar faces in parks, checking cars parked near schools. Friends spoke quietly in living rooms about encounters they had once dismissed. A man lingering in the grocery store, a shadowy figure near a bus stop, a car seen repeatedly over weeks with no explanation. Each memory, once insignificant, now carried weight. Lane understood the duality of this vigilance. It was protective, yet was born from years of uncertainty and trauma. The cold case had been solved, but the fear it generated lingered like a stubborn stain on the fabric of everyday life. The investigation into the man's past expanded, revealing a network of behaviors, addresses, and patterns that left detectives unsettled. Lane discovered that the predator had moved frequently, renting small apartments and living quietly, blending seamlessly into neighborhoods. Each move left faint traces, minor complaints to landlords, fleeting interactions with neighbors, a job held briefly, all of which had seemed ordinary at the time. Yet, when viewed through the lens of the confession, these fragments formed a mosaic of deliberate preparation and observation. Lane realized that the predator had studied patterns of movement, daily routines, and human behavior, selecting victims with careful calculation and exploiting the predictability of urban life. Lane's nights were haunted by reconstructed timelines. He visualized Emily walking toward the corner store, the tote bag swinging lightly, the gentle hum of the city masking the predator's approach. He traced every shadow that could have concealed a threat, every flicker of movement that might have gone unnoticed. The precision with which the man had monitored her movements, the meticulous attention to seemingly mundane details, was almost impossible to comprehend. Lane felt the weight of helplessness that Emily must have experienced, the slow, creeping realization that danger was imminent, yet invisible and inevitable. For Emily's family, the months following the arrest were a blur of media attention, private grief, and attempts to find closure. Lane spent countless hours explaining forensic details, reviewing evidence, and walking them through the confession timeline. Yet no explanation could restore lost time. No forensic breakthrough could return stolen years. The family's grief was compounded by the realization that closure was not synonymous with healing. It was a factual acknowledgement of reality, a way to frame sorrow in the context of truth. Each family gathering, each memory shared, carried with it the weight of what might have been, the knowledge of milestones never celebrated, and the haunting absence that no confession could erase. Community response evolved slowly. Neighbors organized informal patrols, discussing observations, noting unfamiliar faces, and sharing details about incidents that had previously gone unreported. Schools introduced urban awareness programs, teaching children to recognize danger while maintaining independence. Local businesses began to implement safety measures, installing cameras and lighting dark corners. The city's collective consciousness had shifted. Awareness had become instinctual. Lane observed this carefully, noting how a single case could alter the psychological fabric of an entire neighborhood, instilling vigilance, suspicion, and resilience in equal measure. The predator's calm, almost clinical demeanor during confession and trial continued to disturb everyone involved. Psychologists consulted on the case described him as methodical, devoid of empathy, and capable of sustained deception. Lane reviewed these profiles alongside his own observations, feeling a chilling sense of inevitability. The predator's ability to mask intent, exploit normalcy, and patiently await opportunity underscored the vulnerability inherent in routine urban life. Lane began to view ordinary spaces differently. A darkened alley, a quiet street at night, a momentary lapse in attention could become catastrophic if unseen malevolence lurked nearby. The city itself seemed to hum with latent danger, ordinary structures now cast in the light of past horrors. Lane's obsession with reconstructing the final hours of Emily's life deepened. Using old maps, photographs, and witness statements, he recreated her path, marking intersections, potential hazards, and escape routes that could have been. He imagined every step, every decision, every pause, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing against him. The predator's movements were equally precise, calculated to exploit gaps in awareness and opportunity. Lane became immersed in a mental choreography, tracing footsteps in silence, visualizing the fatal convergence of ordinary life and extraordinary malevolence. The process was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, yet necessary for understanding, for closure, and for ensuring that future threats could be anticipated. Despite legal closure, unanswered questions persisted. Why Emily? Why that night? What impulses had driven a man to plan, observe, and execute with such patient precision? Lane pondered these questions endlessly, aware that human psychology often defies comprehension, and that evil can manifest in ways that leave no rational explanation. The trial had delivered justice, yet it had also revealed uncomfortable truths: the fragility of safety, the ease with which routine can mask danger, and the persistence of trauma long after the immediate threat is neutralized. Late one night, Lane revisited the corner store where Emily had made her last purchase. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, illuminating the polished floors and stacked shelves. Lane traced her imagined path through the store, noting how ordinary actions, selecting items, exchanging greetings, could be observed, interpreted, and manipulated by someone with malicious intent. The man's confession detailed this observation with disturbing clarity, confirming that the smallest routine gestures had been cataloged and exploited. Lane felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized how easily normal life could intersect with extraordinary evil. Emily Harper's memory began to influence broader investigations across Chicago. Lane's methodology, meticulous reconstruction, pattern recognition, and forensic cross-referencing became a model for other cold cases. Young detectives studied the case, learning to appreciate the importance of overlooked details, the value of persistence, and the transformative power of advancing technology. Yet even as these lessons were disseminated, the city remained acutely aware that resolution does not erase trauma, that closure exists alongside persistent memory, and that vigilance must be maintained indefinitely. Communities adapted. Neighborhood watches became more formalized. Parents engaged children in discussions about safety, and residents shared information about suspicious behavior. Even small anomalies, an idling car, an unfamiliar face, a brief interaction, were documented and monitored. The city had internalized the lessons of Emily Harper's disappearance. That ordinary life can conceal danger, that vigilance is both a responsibility and a necessity, and that unresolved trauma can linger for decades, shaping behavior and perception long after a case is closed. Lane continued his personal engagement with the case, revisiting evidence, reviewing timelines, and consulting on other cold cases. He developed a network of forensic specialists, psychologists, and investigators dedicated to understanding patterns of patient predation. Emily Harper's case had become a template, a demonstration of how persistence, observation, and technology could converge to uncover truth. Lane recognized that this pursuit was ongoing, that even with confession, justice, and closure, vigilance must be continuous. The city's streets, though calm, remained watchful, and shadows retained the memory of past horrors. Emily Harper's story, though resolved in court, retained its power to unsettle. Parents, neighbors, and detectives alike carried fragments of her story in their awareness, a constant reminder of the fragility of safety and the necessity of vigilance. Lane, walking home through darkened streets, could feel the city's pulse, its quiet unease, and a lingering presence of history pressing against the ordinary rhythm of life. The cold case had been solved, yet its echoes persisted, threading through buildings, alleys, streets, and collective memory, a haunting testament to the past, the predator, and the resilience required to confront darkness when it emerges in the most familiar of spaces. Even with the man behind bars, the shadow of Emily Harper's disappearance lingered like a persistent fog over Chicago's west side. Lane returned repeatedly to the streets she had walked, the corners she had turned, the alley she had passed, tracing the invisible threads of the predator's planning. The confession had revealed almost everything, or so it seemed, but there were anomalies, small discrepancies that gnawed at Lane's instincts. Certain details didn't add up. A neighbor's account of a figure lingering near her apartment that night, a faint tire track near an alleyway that didn't match the vehicle the man admitted to using, subtle inconsistencies that refused to resolve neatly. These loose threads became Lane's obsession. He could not accept the story as complete, not when the city's safety and Emily's memory depended on absolute truth. Lane revisited old evidence, dusting off boxes stored in the cold case unit. Letters, photographs, old interviews, and forensic swabs that had once yielded nothing now demanded new attention. Advanced imaging and chemical analysis revealed traces previously undetectable. Microscopic fibers, faint residues, subtle DNA fragments that had eluded testing in 1998. Lane examined each piece with painstaking care, mapping anomalies against the confession. Slowly, patterns emerged. A few details suggested the possibility of a second location where Emily may have been held temporarily, a stop along the predator's carefully orchestrated path that he had omitted or forgotten. The revelation sent a chill through Lane. Even after a confession, the full horror may not have been fully revealed. The community remained tense. People spoke quietly about sightings, unusual sounds, and fleeting interactions that had once seemed harmless. One elderly woman described seeing a van parked near the alley behind Emily's apartment, a detail she had dismissed for decades, assuming it belonged to a delivery driver. Another resident recalled hearing a woman scream in the early hours, muffled and distant, coinciding with the night of Emily's disappearance. These small accounts, collected together, formed a mosaic of unease. Lane realized that even in a city seemingly closed to the past, memory preserves fragments of truth, fragments that may yet illuminate hidden aspects of the case. Lane also reviewed the predator's personal history, uncovering subtle patterns of obsession and control. Diaries, notebooks, and personal correspondences revealed an individual fascinated by surveillance, observation, and manipulation. He cataloged routines, behaviors, and interactions with neighbors, showing a meticulous, almost ritualistic approach to understanding human movement. Lane shivered as he considered how ordinary life had been transformed into a stage for predation. Sidewalks, parks, corner stores, all co-opted as instruments of control and terror. The predator's mind was a chilling map of patience, calculation, and cold detachment, a blueprint for exploiting the smallest deviations in routine. Psychologists consulted by Lane described the behavior as methodical predation with obsessive control, highlighting how the predator's ability to observe, memorize, and manipulate allowed him to evade detection for decades. Lane found these profiles deeply unsettling. The danger had not been the act alone, but the preparation, the constant watching, the detailed reconstruction of victims' movements, the patience to wait until the perfect opportunity emerged. It was a reminder that evil can thrive quietly, invisibly, and that awareness is the only safeguard against such precise malevolence. Meanwhile, Lane began conducting new interviews with old witnesses, individuals who had been overlooked or deemed unhelpful in 1998. Each conversation revealed subtle anomalies, a fleeting glance, an inconsistent statement, a brief moment of hesitation remembered only in retrospect. Lane compiled these accounts, seeking correlations, tracing timelines, and reconstructing paths. The result was a network of potential clues that hinted at locations, moments, and actions never considered during the initial investigation. He realized that the confession, while detailed, may have unintentionally omitted certain steps, perhaps because the predator had believed they were inconsequential or easily forgotten. The city itself seemed to respond to this renewed investigation. Residents reported unusual activity, cars idling for minutes at a time, strangers walking slowly through neighborhoods, the occasional reflection of movement in a window that did not belong to any familiar neighbor. Lane treated each report with gravity, cross-referencing them with historical records and confession details. Though many proved mundane, a few corresponded eerily with locations and times described by the predator. Lane's pulse quickened as he traced these threads, understanding that even solved cases can hold undiscovered facets, and that vigilance can reveal truths buried beneath layers of time. Emily's family remained at the center of this ongoing exploration. The discovery of new anomalies reopened emotional wounds, forcing them to confront not only the loss but the lingering uncertainty. Lane met with them frequently, explaining the potential significance of newly uncovered evidence, describing his methodical review, and emphasizing that uncovering every detail was necessary for complete closure. The family's relief from the initial confession was now intertwined with renewed anxiety, a reminder that justice, though delivered, cannot undo trauma or fill the void left by a life stolen. Lane's nights grew longer. Alone in the dim glow of his office, he revisited maps, photographs, and forensic reports, tracing paths and reconstructing movements in meticulous detail. He imagined Emily's steps, the rhythm of her walk, the casual gestures that had become crucial elements in the predator's surveillance. He traced the man's calculated maneuvers, the pauses, the turns, the observations he had made along the way. Each reconstruction was a blend of logic and intuition, a delicate dance between understanding human behavior and confronting the cold precision of predation. Lane felt both exhausted and driven, compelled by a need to uncover every last detail. The predator's calmness remained a haunting counterpoint. Lane reflected on the man's demeanor during confession and trial, measured, detached, and almost surgical in his narration of events. Lane recognized that this calm was not remorse, it was control. It was a mechanism for maintaining authority over a story that, for decades, had been entirely within the predator's grasp. Lane's task, by contrast, was to wrestle the narrative from that control, to reconstruct truth from shadows, and to give meaning to the fragments of terror that had been experienced, remembered, and reported. In the midst of this renewed investigation, subtle environmental factors gained attention. Lane analyzed street lighting, traffic patterns, and the positioning of buildings along Emily's route. He noted that shadows cast by lampposts and parked cars could have provided perfect concealment. He observed that urban noise, traffic, conversations, construction created a cover that the predator could exploit. These factors, mundane in isolation, collectively contributed to the successful execution of his plan. Lane realized that urban spaces, familiar and seemingly safe, could be weaponized by those with knowledge, patience, and intent. Community vigilance intensified. Residents shared observations through informal networks, documenting anomalies and suspicious behavior. Social media platforms buzzed with renewed attention to past incidents, as people connected memories once considered irrelevant. Lane found that this communal memory was a powerful tool for reconstruction. Shared recollections allowed investigators to piece together aspects of the case that the confession had omitted or obscured. The community, once passive witnesses, became active participants in understanding the depths of what had occurred and ensuring that vigilance persisted. Lane also began to consider the predator's potential interactions with other unsolved cases. By analyzing patterns of behavior, temporal and spatial overlaps, and the methods employed, he identified several cold cases that might share similarities with Emily's disappearance. Each lead required careful review, witness interviews, forensic reevaluation, and cross-referencing of previously ignored details. Lane felt a mixture of dread and responsibility. While Emily's case had reached a form of resolution, it was clear that the predator's reach and methods might have extended beyond a single victim. Understanding the full scope became imperative, both for justice and for prevention. Late nights were spent reconstructing the predator's perspective, imagining how he surveyed streets, monitored routines, and chose moments with precision. Lane visualized him observing Emily from the periphery, noting every gesture, memorizing every pause, and calculating each movement. The realization that a life could be reduced to a series of observations and calculated decisions unsettled Lane deeply. He recognized that understanding the predator's methods was essential to safeguarding future potential victims and to comprehending the full scope of the crime's psychological and operational dimensions. Emily Harper's story, while legally resolved, remained a living, breathing lesson for Chicago. Lane understood that closure is never absolute. While confessions, arrests, and trials provide societal structure to grief and trauma, they cannot fully erase the shadows left by predation. The city had learned vigilance, awareness, and the necessity of meticulous observation. Residents, detectives, and families alike carried fragments of memory, of fear, and of hope. Lane knew that every solved cold case leaves behind echoes that demand attention, reflection, and continued awareness to prevent history from repeating itself. Even as the trial faded from headlines, Lane felt the pulse of the city change. Chicago's west side was quieter in some ways, yet every shadow seemed to thrum with memory. Every alleyway a subtle reminder that danger had once moved undetected here. Lane walked these streets at night, alone, tracing the routes Emily had taken, imagining her footsteps, her rhythm, the casual gestures of a life that had been meticulously studied by someone with patience and intent. The city itself seemed to hum with unease, as if it remembered, and as if every resident carried fragments of fear and vigilance from the night she vanished. Lane understood that resolution did not erase trauma. It merely shifted it, embedding lessons deep within collective memory. Lane returned repeatedly to the man's past, analyzing patterns of movement, employment, and social interaction. He discovered subtleties that had previously gone unnoticed. Months spent in one apartment block without complaint, brief stints at libraries and stores where he observed people without engagement, a fascination with surveillance equipment and catalogs he had purchased long before Emily disappeared. Lane felt a shiver each time he realized how ordinary these activities seemed. No one would have suspected. Each minor action, each routine observation, had been part of a meticulous framework designed to predict and exploit human behavior. Lane's mind traced these sequences, seeing them as steps in a choreography of control, a dance executed in plain sight. Meanwhile, community memory became a tool for uncovering small anomalies. Residents shared fragmented recollections. A van parked near a playground for several nights, an unfamiliar man photographing buildings, a fleeting scream barely heard. Individually, these incidents had seemed mundane, perhaps irrelevant. Together, they hinted at a pattern, a history of subtle predation extending beyond the single act confessed. Lane compiled these reports, overlaying them with dates, locations, and known movements of the predator. Slowly, a chilling map emerged, revealing how ordinary life had been infiltrated by deliberate observation, how fleeting moments of inattention had been exploited with devastating precision. Lane's nights became consumed with reconstruction. He traced Emily's final path from her apartment to the corner store, then through the streets and alleys toward the warehouse described in the confession. Every shadow, every change in light, every sound became a potential element of the predator's surveillance. Lane imagined the predator's gaze, noting each gesture, memorizing each hesitation, predicting movement. He could almost feel Emily's awareness growing, subtle tension building as routine shifted into threat, yet powerless against an adversary whose patience and calculation were infinite. Lane's reconstruction was exhausting, obsessive, and necessary, a mental choreography that captured both horror and truth. The man's confession, while detailed, left small but significant gaps. Lane noted minor inconsistencies, timelines that didn't perfectly align with environmental conditions, steps or detours not mentioned, small observations by witnesses that contradicted parts of the narrative. Lane's instincts screamed that the confession was incomplete, that the full extent of the predator's activities might never be known. These loose threads became an obsession, a reminder that even solved cases contain shadows, and that the pursuit of understanding does not end with legal closure. Psychologists analyzing the predator's behavior described a chilling combination of patience, obsession, and strategic calculation. He had not acted impulsively. Every move was deliberate, rehearsed, and controlled. Lane felt a deep unease contemplating how ordinary life, sidewalks, corner stores, streetlights, had been transformed into a stage for predation. The predator's ability to anticipate human behavior, to exploit the predictable, and to remain unnoticed for decades was almost beyond comprehension. Lane realized that the danger had never been in the act alone, but in the meticulous preparation, in the slow accumulation of knowledge and observation, in the weaponization of everyday spaces. Emily's family grappled with the duality of relief and renewed anxiety. While the confession provided answers, it also opened the door to questions that had no resolution. Lane met with them regularly, explaining the significance of subtle anomalies, describing the potential for previously overlooked evidence, and emphasizing the necessity of fully understanding the predator's methods. Their grief remained, layered now with caution and vigilance. Birthdays, holidays, milestones, all that Emily had missed, formed a backdrop of sorrow against which any factual closure felt inadequate. Lane understood that justice could answer questions, but could not heal emotional wounds. The community remained active in vigilance. Informal networks of observation emerged. Neighbors exchanged notes on suspicious behavior, and local businesses adopted enhanced safety measures. Lane recognized that the lessons from Emily's disappearance were deeply embedded. Ordinary life could conceal extraordinary danger. Awareness was a necessary skill, and the past has a tendency to linger in memory and perception. Even as time passed, residents recalled seemingly insignificant details. Cars parked too long, fleeting glances, irregular patterns that might have been overlooked in any other context. These fragments of memory were now invaluable, part of the city's collective understanding of risk and safety. Lane also examined the predator's interactions with other potential victims. By reviewing unsolved cases, patterns emerged, similarities in location, timing, method, and opportunity. Lane cross-referenced confession details with cold cases that had remained dormant for years, identifying potential overlaps. Each lead required careful investigation, witness interviews, forensic reevaluation, and historical mapping. Lane felt a mix of dread and responsibility. While Emily's case had reached a form of resolution, the broader pattern of predation might extend beyond her, requiring vigilance, documentation, and careful reconstruction to prevent further tragedy. Even with forensic advancements and confession, Lane understood that human perception is imperfect. The predator had exploited assumptions, routine behavior, and trust in the familiar. Lane imagined him moving through streets, observing from shadows, memorizing patterns, and exploiting the smallest deviations. The realization that evil can operate quietly, invisibly, and with patient calculation was unsettling. Lane's task was to unravel this meticulous planning, to reconstruct events with precision, and to provide both factual closure and psychological understanding of a predator whose methods defied ordinary logic. Emily's story influenced broader investigative practices. Lane trained younger detectives on meticulous reconstruction, pattern recognition, and the use of advanced forensic technology to revisit cold cases. He emphasized the importance of memory, intuition, and the value of seemingly insignificant details. The case became a template for understanding patient predation, how observation, calculation, and patience can enable crimes to remain undetected for decades. Lane realized that the city's infrastructure, social dynamics, and human habits could all be manipulated by someone with knowledge, patience, and intent. Despite progress, uncertainty persisted. Lane noted small anomalies that remained unexplained, brief sounds reported by neighbors, subtle inconsistencies in timelines, and environmental factors that did not align perfectly with the confession. These gaps reminded him that even the most thorough confession may leave shadows, and that resolution is often partial, framed by facts but constrained by memory, perception, and the limits of human knowledge. The city, too, retained this tension, a mix of relief, vigilance, and persistent unease. Lane's work became a delicate balance of observation and reconstruction. He revisited crime scene photographs, maps, witness statements, and environmental factors, layering new technology atop old evidence. He imagined the predator's perspective, noting where he might have concealed himself, how he could have observed without detection, and the precision required to execute such a plan. Lane's mind moved between past and present, reconstructing both Emily's movements and the predator's, tracing invisible threads that connected ordinary life with extraordinary malevolence. The West Side adapted. Residents heightened awareness, implemented informal observation systems, and shared memories that once seemed inconsequential. Lane recognized the power of collective memory. Small details, when combined, form a mosaic capable of illuminating what had once been invisible. Emily Harper's story, though legally resolved, continued to shape perception, behavior, and urban consciousness. The city had learned to observe, remember, and anticipate potential danger, embedding lessons in its architecture, streets, and routines. Lane continued to walk the streets at night, tracing the steps of both victim and predator, aware that the lessons of the past remain embedded in the present. Shadows seemed heavier, alleys longer, and ordinary routines more fragile. Emily Harper's cold case, while officially solved, remained alive in memory, in vigilance, and in the quiet understanding that ordinary life can conceal extraordinary darkness. Lane felt the weight of this awareness pressing on him, a reminder that even after confession, even after justice, the echoes of evil linger, shaping perception, behavior, and the subtle rhythm of the city itself. Even months after the confession, Lane's mind refused to rest. Chicago's West Side had quieted on the surface, yet under that calm lay currents of unease. Shadows and alleys, the hum of distant traffic, the flicker of streetlights, all seemed amplified now, each ordinary sound and movement charged with latent danger. Lane retraced Emily Harper's path repeatedly, each step a mental rehearsal of her last night, every twist of the sidewalk and every turn of the corner a haunting echo. The confession had brought closure, yes, but the gaps, the anomalies, the unspoken details continued to gnaw at him. There was a subtle tension, a whisper of unfinished business that refused to be silenced. Lane dove deeper into the predator's past, scanning old records, cross-referencing employment histories, addresses, and acquaintances. Something unsettling emerged, patterns that aligned eerily with unsolved disappearances in the city over the years. Minor details, van sightings, shadowy figures, unexplained absences, coalesced into a network of possibility. Lane recognized that Emily Harper's abduction, while horrifying, might not have been an isolated act. The predator's meticulous nature suggested repetition, practice, refinement. Lane's pulse quickened as he mapped locations, noting the predator's mobility, the careful selection of timing, the exploitation of urban routines. Ordinary streets had been manipulated into a predator's playground, unnoticed for decades. Community accounts became critical again. Residents began recalling odd encounters, minor disturbances, and fleeting observations long dismissed. A man lingering outside a building, a car parked too long near an alley, a shadow in a window at night. Each small fragment, when cross-referenced with confession details and new investigative patterns, formed a mosaic of previously invisible activity. Lane meticulously documented each report, connecting threads, evaluating inconsistencies, and refining his reconstruction. He realized the predator's intelligence lay not only in patient execution, but in the ability to remain almost invisible within ordinary life. These recollections, once ignored, now illuminated dark corners that had been overlooked for decades. Lane's reconstruction of Emily's final movements became obsessive. He traced her steps from her apartment, imagining the sway of her tote bag, the rhythm of her gait, the subtle hesitations that would have seemed ordinary to any passerby. He imagined the predator following, calculating every motion, memorizing every pause, anticipating her decisions. Each shadow became a potential hiding place, each alley a potential trap. Lane's mind oscillated between Emily's perspective and the predator's, constructing an almost unbearable choreography of pursuit and evasion. The level of patient calculation was staggering. It was a reminder that evil can thrive quietly, invisibly, and with terrifying precision. The gaps in the confession nagged at Lane. Minor inconsistencies, the timing of certain movements, unexplained detours, faint physical evidence at locations the predator never admitted to visiting, suggested the possibility of additional locations, temporary holds, or encounters with other individuals. Lane became convinced that the full narrative was more complex than the confession allowed. The realization was chilling. Even with legal closure, a predator's mind can hold secrets that may never be fully disclosed, leaving unresolved questions that persist like shadows in the corners of memory. Psychologists consulted with Lane emphasized the methodical nature of the predator. His actions were not impulsive. They were rehearsed, precise, and calculated. Lane understood that his calm demeanor during confession did not indicate remorse. It indicated control. The predator had orchestrated not only Emily Harper's abduction, but decades of movement, observation, and social camouflage, exploiting predictable human behavior and ordinary routines. Lane felt the weight of this realization pressing against him. The predator's patience, intelligence, and invisibility had allowed him to operate undetected for decades, a ghost within the city's rhythm. Emily's family continued to grapple with conflicting emotions. The initial relief of confession had given way to renewed anxiety. Lane met with them frequently, discussing the significance of minor anomalies, the implications of unreported sightings, and the possibility that the predator's reach extended beyond Emily. Their grief, already profound, was now layered with uncertainty. Lane could see the tension etched in their faces, the hyper-awareness of ordinary life, the hesitation to trust moments that once seemed mundane. Closure, he realized, is never absolute. It exists alongside lingering trauma and the persistent echo of what might have been. Community vigilance intensified. Informal networks of observation grew, neighbors exchanged information, and local businesses implemented heightened security measures. Lane recognized that the city had internalized lessons from Emily's disappearance. Routine behavior can mask extraordinary danger. Vigilance is a necessity, and memory, even decades old, can hold vital clues. Small, seemingly irrelevant observations became invaluable, forming a collective awareness that strengthened the community's ability to detect subtle threats. Even after confession, the city had learned to watch, remember, and anticipate. Lane expanded his investigation to other potential victims. Patterns of predation suggested that Emily Harper may have been one of many. Lane cross-referenced confession details with unsolved disappearances, anomalies in witness reports, and overlooked forensic evidence. Each lead required meticulous review, re-interviewing witnesses, re-examining physical evidence, and analyzing spatial and temporal patterns. Lane felt the burden of responsibility keenly. While Emily's case had reached legal resolution, the possibility of additional victims demanded rigorous pursuit. The shadow of unreported crimes lingered, a reminder that confession does not always capture the full extent of calculated predation. Lane's nights grew longer, darker, more immersive. He reconstructed the predator's perspective, tracing routes, anticipating decisions, and visualizing interactions. Every observation, every environmental factor, the flicker of a streetlight, the sound of distant traffic, the positioning of parked vehicles, was analyzed for its potential role in facilitating predation. Lane's mind oscillated between two realities: the meticulous world of the predator and the fragile awareness of the victim. The juxtaposition of patience and vulnerability, calculation and innocence, created an almost unbearable tension that Lane carried with him constantly. Even in the physical city, anomalies persisted. Residents reported brief sounds, distant screams, fleeting glances of shadowy figures. Lane treated each report with seriousness, overlaying them onto historical data, confession details, and environmental analysis. While many proved innocuous, a few correlated with locations and patterns identified in both the confession and his ongoing investigation. Lane realized that even decades-old events leave residual echoes, small disruptions in memory and perception that can illuminate hidden aspects of past crimes. The city itself held a memory of what had transpired, if only one knew how to read it. Emily Harper's memory became central to the city's consciousness. Her story shaped urban awareness programs, community vigilance, and investigative methodology. Lane trained new detectives, emphasizing the importance of minor details, the power of observation, and the necessity of revisiting cold cases with fresh eyes and modern technology. Emily's abduction, though officially resolved, became a template for understanding patient predation. The slow accumulation of observation, the careful mapping of human behavior, and the exploitation of routine. Her story served as a warning and a guide, embedding lessons in both the professional and social fabric of Chicago. Lane's mind often returned to the predator's calm demeanor. The man's calculated patience, the absence of remorse, and the ability to maintain control over the narrative were disturbing. Lane recognized that understanding this mindset was essential to prevent further tragedy. The predator's ability to operate invisibly, exploit the ordinary, and patiently observe over years was a stark reminder that vigilance must be continuous, both in law enforcement and in daily life. Emily's story, though legally concluded, demanded ongoing awareness, analysis, and reflection. Late nights found Lane at Emily's former apartment, imagining her steps, her gestures, the subtle tension of her final hours. The apartment, now occupied by new tenants, held echoes of absence. Lane traced her imagined path through the space, noting the angles of light, the positions of furniture, and the potential vantage points the predator might have exploited. He reflected on how ordinary environments can conceal extraordinary danger, how human behavior can be predicted and manipulated, and how vigilance, often invisible, is the only defense against calculated predation. Even with the confession, the trial, and the legal closure, Lane understood that shadows remained. Minor anomalies, historical gaps, and subtle inconsistencies hinted at broader patterns of predation, suggesting that Emily's case was part of a continuum rather than an isolated incident. The city had learned vigilance, yet Lane knew that the echoes of danger persisted, shaping perception, behavior, and the collective consciousness of the West Side. Emily Harper's cold case had been solved, but its legacy endured in memory, awareness, and the quiet understanding that evil, when patient and methodical, leaves traces long after the act itself. Even as Chicago settled into a tense semblance of normalcy, Lane knew the city was holding its breath. West Side streets, once familiar, now seemed like a labyrinth of potential danger, each alleyway a reminder of Emily Harper's disappearance. The predator's meticulous nature haunted Lane. Years of observation, patience, and calculated control had enabled him to operate invisibly, blending into ordinary life while exploiting every opportunity. Lane walked the streets at night, retracing Emily's final route, imagining her cautious steps, her subtle hesitations, the faint unease she may have sensed without fully understanding. Shadows stretched across walls, streetlights flickered in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, and every corner carried the silent memory of what had occurred. Lane's investigation had revealed more than the confession. He uncovered subtle anomalies in the predator's timeline, small detours, overlooked surveillance opportunities, discrepancies between witness reports and confession details. A neighbor had remembered a van parked near an alley for several nights. Another described a figure watching from a dimly lit doorway. Lane cross-referenced these reports with historical records and forensic evidence, identifying potential locations the predator had used that he had never admitted to. Each revelation deepened the sense of unease. Even with a confession, the full extent of calculated predation might remain hidden, locked in the shadows of memory and time. Community vigilance became almost ritualistic. Parents monitored their children with renewed intensity. Neighbors exchanged notes about unfamiliar faces, and local businesses installed cameras in areas previously considered safe. Lane observed these efforts, recognizing the collective consciousness forming around Emily's story. Ordinary moments, a stroll to the corner store, a walk home from school, a conversation on the porch, were now framed by heightened awareness. Even decades after the initial disappearance, the city had learned to read shadows, to interpret silence, and to notice the subtle deviations that could indicate lurking danger. Lane's nights were consumed by reconstruction. He mapped every step Emily had taken, overlaying it with possible predator vantage points, lines of sight, and environmental factors like lighting, traffic, and sound. He imagined her perspective, the rhythm of her movements, the slight uncertainty in her gait. He imagined the predator's perspective, noting how he had studied her patterns, memorized gestures, and anticipated reactions. The juxtaposition of vulnerability and calculated observation created an almost unbearable tension in Lane's mind. He could feel the predator's patience, the years of planning, the precision of movement, and the cold, analytical control exerted over ordinary life. The gaps in the confession gnawed at Lane. Certain moments were unexplained. Why a brief detour down a side street? Why a pause near an abandoned lot? Why minor discrepancies between the predator's statements and witness recollections? Lane hypothesized the existence of temporary holding locations or interactions with other individuals. He felt the weight of possibility pressing down. Even after legal resolution, the predator may have acted beyond what was confessed, leaving unresolved traces in the city. Each anomaly became a thread to follow, a piece of the larger puzzle that could illuminate previously hidden aspects of the crime. Lane consulted psychologists to better understand the predator's mind. They described him as methodical, obsessive, and capable of prolonged deception. He had not acted on impulse. Every move had been deliberate. Lane understood the depth of patience and calculation required to observe, memorize, and manipulate human behavior over decades without detection. Ordinary life had become a stage for predation. Streets, parks, corner stores, all instruments in a carefully orchestrated plan. The predator's calm during confession was not remorse. It was control, a final act of dominance over the narrative he had maintained for decades. Emily's family grappled with the duality of closure and uncertainty. The confession offered answers, but opened doors to new questions. Lane met with them regularly, reviewing timelines, anomalies, and witness statements. Each discovery, each minor inconsistency, reawakened grief and anxiety. Milestones Emily should have celebrated, birthdays, graduations, ordinary family gatherings, had passed, stolen by time and circumstance. Closure, Lane realized, is never absolute. It exists alongside grief, layered with vigilance and the persistent echo of absence. The family's emotional landscape had shifted, relief intertwined with renewed fear, sorrow coupled with cautious hope, the knowledge of justice tempered by the recognition that full understanding might be impossible. Lane expanded his review to other cold cases. Patterns suggested the predator's methodology might have extended beyond Emily Harper. Lane analyzed timing, location, and behavioral similarities, identifying cases that shared characteristics with the Harper abduction. Each lead demanded meticulous examination. Witness interviews, forensic reevaluation, and cross-referencing of historical records. Lane's sense of responsibility deepened. Emily's case had reached legal closure, but the possibility of additional victims lingered, a reminder that confession does not always capture the full scope of a predator's actions. The city had to remain vigilant, and Lane understood that uncovering patterns was essential to preventing further tragedy. Lane reconstructed the predator's perspective with obsessive detail. He visualized surveillance points, lines of sight, and patterns of movement, imagining how the predator had memorized Emily's habits, predicting each step, each pause. Lane traced environmental factors, shadows, sound, traffic, that the predator had exploited. Every calculation reinforced the unsettling reality that ordinary life can be weaponized by someone who observes, memorizes, and waits. The predator's patience, combined with the invisibility of his methods, created a chilling framework in which fear can persist silently, embedded in memory and perception long after the immediate threat is neutralized. Even with confession and trial, minor anomalies persisted. Residents reported faint noises, fleeting glances of figures at night, and shadows that seemed out of place. Lane cross-referenced these accounts with historical patterns, confession details, and forensic data. Some proved irrelevant, but others aligned disturbingly well with locations and movements described in the investigation. The city's memory, Lane realized, retained fragments of the past, small disruptions that could illuminate hidden truths. Emily Harper's abduction had left traces not just in evidence, but in the collective perception of the community itself. Emily's story began to influence investigative practices across Chicago. Lane trained younger detectives on meticulous reconstruction, pattern recognition, and a careful analysis of both witness memory and environmental factors. He emphasized the importance of revisiting cold cases with modern technology, integrating psychological profiles with forensic analysis, and respecting the nuances of human perception. Emily's case became a blueprint, a demonstration of how patient predation, careful observation, and exploitation of routine can allow a predator to operate undetected. Her story served as both a warning and a guide, teaching vigilance, awareness, and the necessity of meticulous documentation. Lane's reflections often returned to the predator's calm, controlled demeanor. The man's patience, intelligence, and invisibility had allowed him to operate for decades without detection. Lane understood that insight into the predator's mind was essential to prevent future harm. Observing, documenting, and reconstructing behavior were crucial tools for investigators and communities alike. Emily Harper's story, while legally concluded, demanded ongoing analysis, reflection, and vigilance. The lessons embedded in her case shaped not only investigations, but also the collective consciousness of the West Side. Late nights found Lane at Emily's former apartment. The rooms were ordinary, yet the weight of memory transformed them. Lane traced her imagined path through the space, observing light angles, furniture placement, and potential vantage points the predator might have exploited. Ordinary environments, Lane realized, could conceal extraordinary danger. Subtle human gestures, minor deviations from routine, and unnoticed interactions became vital elements in understanding how the predator operated. Vigilance, memory, and careful observation emerged as the only defenses against calculated predation. Even with confession and conviction, shadows remained. Minor discrepancies, unexplained anomalies, and residual questions hinted at the possibility of further undiscovered activity. Lane's work continued, balancing reconstruction, analysis, and community vigilance. Emily Harper's cold case, though solved in court, remained alive in memory, shaping perception, behavior, and the awareness of an entire neighborhood. Her story became a lasting lesson. Ordinary life can conceal extraordinary darkness, and even when justice is served, vigilance, reflection, and awareness are the city's only safeguards against the persistence of evil. Even as the city attempted to reclaim a sense of normalcy, Lane felt the pulse of Chicago thrum with residual unease. West Side streets, familiar yet unpredictable, carried echoes of Emily Harper's disappearance. Each corner, alley, and faded crosswalk seemed to remember. Lane retraced paths she had walked, imagining her steps, her gaze scanning for any hint of danger, her shoulders tensed with subtle, unspoken apprehension. Shadows lengthened unnaturally beneath flickering streetlights, and even the hum of distant traffic seemed weighted, pregnant with memory. The predator's meticulous planning, patience, and ability to vanish into ordinary life lingered in the city's collective psyche. Lane understood that confession had solved the legal puzzle, yet the psychological landscape of the West Side remained unsettled, stitched together by memory, vigilance, and fear. Lane pored over the predator's history again, seeking hidden threads overlooked in the initial investigation. Patterns emerged across decades. Locations visited briefly, apartments rented for days, jobs held for months with no trace, all connected by subtle observation and planning. Minor details in diaries, old financial records, and personal correspondences revealed a methodical, almost ritualistic approach to understanding human behavior. Lane traced these behaviors, noting how mundane routines, shopping trips, late-night walks, casual errands, had been studied, memorized, and exploited. Ordinary life had become a stage for predation, and the predator had performed a silent, calculated choreography, unseen yet devastatingly effective. Community recollections gained new importance. Neighbors began to recall overlooked incidents. A van parked for hours near an abandoned warehouse, a shadowy figure outside the corner store, distant screams muffled by city noise. Lane carefully cross-referenced these accounts with confession details and environmental analysis. Each fragment, though minor in isolation, suggested a broader pattern. He realized that, even decades later, the city's memory retained vital clues, latent signals of a predator's presence, and that these fragments could illuminate previously hidden aspects of the crime. The puzzle, Lane understood, extended beyond Emily. It threaded through the fabric of countless lives and streets, a silent warning encoded in ordinary details. Lane's nightly reconstructions became almost unbearable in intensity. He traced Emily's path, step by step, noting every gesture, pause, and minor deviation. He imagined the predator shadowing her, memorizing these details, exploiting routine, and predicting human behavior with chilling precision. The juxtaposition of vulnerability and methodical calculation weighed heavily on him. He felt the predator's patience pressing against the city, the invisible hand shaping moments in Emily's life without detection. Lane's mind became a theater of memory and anticipation, oscillating between the lived experience of the victim and the calculated observation of the predator. Each reconstruction deepened his understanding, but also intensified the emotional toll. Subtle discrepancies in the confession nagged at Lane. Why did the predator describe certain routes while omitting others? Why were minor detours unexplained? Why did environmental evidence conflict slightly with statements made during interrogation? Lane hypothesized that additional temporary locations, unreported interactions, or overlooked observations might exist. The possibility that Emily's ordeal had included moments not captured in the confession was both terrifying and motivating. Lane realized that even with legal closure, the predator's mind could conceal events, leaving traces that only meticulous reconstruction could uncover. Psychologists consulted on the case emphasized the predator's combination of obsessive patience, strategic calculation, and ability to blend seamlessly into ordinary life. Lane understood that these traits had enabled decades of unnoticed observation and precise execution. Ordinary city life, sidewalks, streetlights, corner stores, had become a stage for exploitation. The predator's calm during confession did not indicate remorse. It indicated dominance and control over the narrative. Lane's task was to wrest the full truth from shadows, to reconstruct moments invisible to anyone at the time, and to provide both factual and psychological understanding of events. Emily's family continued to navigate conflicting emotions. Relief at confession coexisted with renewed anxiety as Lane shared findings of minor anomalies and potential additional locations. Each revelation reopened old wounds, layering grief with vigilance and uncertainty. The absence of milestones, birthdays, graduations, ordinary family gatherings, loomed heavily over them. Lane